In today's video, we're going to have a look at some new developments around the use of Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering in a Dolby Atmos production workflow. First, we will check out the new version of Studio One, which brought native Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering support to the popular DAW. And then we're going to have a look at the latest version of Audiomover's Binaural Rendering plugin. This update adds the option to use the binaural renderer in standalone mode, and that will allow us to utilize Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer pretty much everywhere in any digital audio workstation. And as an example, we're going to use Ableton Live today. So if you're interested in Dolby Atmos music production, you do not want to miss this. Let's get started. If you've never heard about Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering, let me first give you the brief TLDR. Well, in a nutshell, Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering is Apple's approach of making Dolby Atmos content accessible to users who listen to audio on headphones, in particular on Apple AirPods Pro or AirPods Max. It enables the user to perceive Dolby Atmos content as if they would be in a fully equipped Dolby Atmos listening environment, and it does that by measuring the head position through the AirPods and then using that information to calculate the correct sound that is then sent to the AirPods. The result is that the listener feels like being in a room with, say, a 7.1.4 surround sound setup, even though they are only using headphones. If you are using Apple AirPods on an Apple device with either the Apple Music or Apple TV app and you have spatial audio turned on, then this is the way you will hear any Dolby Atmos or surround sound content. And because this is so widely available, it is very important that producers can test how the audio sounds when listened to with Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering. In the past, this was only possible through Apple's own digital audio workstation Logic. Over the last couple of months, however, Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering has become available in other digital audio workstations as well. This happened first through the introduction of the Audiomover's Binaural Rendering plugin, which can be used in any multi-channel capable DAW, and then through the introduction of the Ginger Audio iRender plugin, which can be used inside the virtual monitor controlling software Ground Control Sphere by Ginger Audio. I already made videos about both solutions. If you're interested in those, I highly recommend watching them. I will leave links in the description below. In today's video, I want to talk about two additional options. First, the native integration of Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering into Studio One's Dolby Atmos workflow, and then the new standalone version of Audiomover's Binaural Renderer, which provides a more cost-effective alternative to Ginger Audio's Ground Control Sphere. But before we get started with Studio One, let me first make a few additional comments. First of all, Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering is only available on Mac operating systems. And on top of that, you need to have an Apple Silicon Mac. If you have an older Intel-based Mac, you're unfortunately out of luck. Second, none of this is sponsored content. I have purchased everything that I'm going to use today with my own money, and everything that I'm going to say is strictly my own opinion. Nobody had any influence on this video and nobody saw it before it goes live on YouTube. And with that being said, let's hop into Studio One and check out the new native Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering capabilities that were introduced in version 6.6. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to put on the AirPods, and I'm going to use the AirPods Pro today because I really like those. I could also use the AirPods Max or any of the Beats headphones that come with personalized Apple Spatial Audio, but I'm going to use the Pro today. And the next thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that they also connect to my Mac, because otherwise they are not going to be able to communicate the head tracking information with my Mac. So I go into the sound settings and just make sure that they are connected. Now I'm actually not going to send the audio directly to the AirPods. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use a loopback device. I'm just going to show that here for a second. Where have we? Here we are, loopback. And the reason I'm going to use the loopback device is simply so that you guys can hear what I'm hearing. So I have this little loopback AirPods device that essentially just takes the audio in and then kind of distributes it into the Apple AirPods so that I can hear something, and into the Rodecaster so that you guys can hear something. So whenever I'm going to use the loopback AirPods device, this is where you guys would use simply the AirPods Pro or AirPods Max or whatever you're using. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Studio One. Where do we have Studio One? Here's Studio One. And I'm going to use a very simple project with just one loop. The loop that I'm going to use comes from a developer that I really like. A producer that produces sample packs for games and movie trailers and things like that. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. Once again, not sponsored. I just like the way I just like the sounds that they create. Now, there are two different ways on how I can start a Dolby Atmos project. I can either go into the templates and create a new mix in surround project, or I can simply create a new song and then kind of make the changes manually. This is what I'm going to do. I usually do that just to make sure that everything is as clean as possible. So I just started up a new project, and what I need to do now is I need to just turn it into a Dolby Atmos project. So I go into the settings, into the preferences, and in the preferences, first of all, I need to make sure that the playback device is set to the loopback AirPods device. Now, once again, in your case, this would be just the AirPods, so that they are actually connected correctly. And then I need to go into the song setup, and in the song setup under spatial audio, I just make sure that the mode is set to Dolby Atmos. And then I leave everything else alone. The output format is stereo. I'm just working with stereo here. That's fine. And I press OK, and that's pretty much it. That opens up the Dolby Atmos renderer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the mix view so that you also see that. Now, the nice thing about Studio One, and I did a video about that a long time ago, is that the way they've actually set that up is extremely convenient. So you can control the Dolby Atmos renderer pretty much from the mix view here. So you never really need to open that up. That is extremely convenient. It's probably the best solution when it comes to Dolby Atmos workflow. So if you are starting out with Dolby Atmos Studio One, is something that you might want to look into. Now, I'm going to simply take that little loop that I have here, and I have that here on my desktop, and I'm going to drop that in here. And what this is going to do is this is simply going to take that, and it's going to send that into the bed track of the Dolby Atmos renderer. So if you play that now, I should hear that coming through the Dolby Atmos bed. So let's just press play. And let's open up the Dolby Atmos renderer. But this comes in a little hot, so let me just kind of reduce the gain a little. So maybe like 7 dBs, that should be fine. Yeah, so I think we're fine here. And as you can see, it sort of just comes in the Dolby Atmos bed in left and right. And this is really everything that I need in order to demonstrate how the Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering works. Now, the way to set this up is extremely simple. All you really need to do is you need to change the output from stereo to the Apple Spatial Audio. So let's do that. Now we have Apple Spatial Audio. So let's just compare those for a second. So this is Apple Spatial Audio. Let's switch that over to Dolby Atmos Binaural. So this is Dolby Atmos Binaural. And then for comparison, let's go back to stereo. So this is now stereo. And this is really everything you need to do in order to enable Apple Spatial Audio. Let me just stop the audio here. But obviously, we want to actually have head tracking. And in order to enable head tracking, all we really need to do is we need to go into the settings here. And under settings, I have under Apple Spatial Audio mode different options. I can have it in standard, which is what I have right now, or I can switch that over to head tracking. And as soon as I switch that over to head tracking, the system will recognize my head position and will present the audio accordingly so that I get the impression that I'm actually in a 7.1.4 mixing environment. There are also the options of personalized and personalized head tracking. If you are using your AirPods with an iPhone, for example, you can set up a personalized head-related transfer function. For me personally, that doesn't really work particularly well. I usually stick to the standard one, but your mileage may vary. You might very well kind of enjoy the personalized version of that. Whatever sounds better to you, just use that one. Once again, in my case, I'm just going to sticking with the standard one. So let's switch that over to head tracking. And as soon as I switch that over, I should be able to hear everything head tracked. Now, the way I'm going to do that now is, as I always do, because you guys hear exactly the same thing that I'm hearing, I'm going to move my head. And when I move my head, you guys should hear that as a panning. So if I move my head to the left, for example, you guys should hear that as a panning to the right, because that's essentially what I'm hearing. So let's just, so once again, we have head tracking turned on here. And let's just press play and let's see if we're actually getting something. So if I'm now turning my head to the left, the audio stays here on the right. now it's on the left. So it actually works extremely well. Let me just double check if the audio comes in, because usually kind of it tends to come in very hot for that particular loop. So, but everything is fine here. Now, in order to make that a little bit more obvious, let me do one more thing. Let me just change the spread to 0, and that essentially means that I have a mono signal. Once again, let's just double check that the signal is not too hot. Yeah, that's fine. So if I'm now moving my head, oops, I should probably kind of restart the loop. Let's restart that. So once again, you hear that as a panning. And for me personally, it gives the impression that the sound is right in front of me. Now, there's one disadvantage of using Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering, and that is if I'm staying or if I'm looking in the same direction for a longer period of time, the system will actually recalibrate because it thinks that I've essentially switched my listening position. So if I'm, for example, switching, or if I'm moving my head to the left and I'm staying here for a little bit, the audio will recenter. And that can be a little bit annoying. Now, the reason it does that is because head tracking usually comes with a little bit of drift. So for those of you who have worked with head trackers before, you guys know that if you have a head tracker, they tend to drift a little. Now, by dynamically recentering the head tracking in the Apple AirPods, they essentially take care of that. So it never really drifts. But the disadvantage is that if you're staying in a certain position for a longer period of time, then it thinks that it drifted around and it needs to kind of recenter, and that's what it's going to do. And it can be a little bit of a disadvantage if you want to plan out a three-dimensional sound field and you kind of try to figure out, does this sound good here? And you're kind of staying in that position and suddenly everything recenters. So this is something that you need to get used to. That's the only disadvantage. Other than that, this works extremely well, and once again, the implementation that Presonus did with Studio One is exceptionally well done. So if you have any interest in Dolby Atmos, Studio One is probably the best way to get started. With that being said, let's turn it over to another solution, which is the binaural rendering plugin from Audio Movers, and they also have an update. But before I continue with the Audio Movers plugin, a quick reminder that if you have enjoyed this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, please either use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server. Invite link is in the description. If you want to support this channel, you can do that by becoming a member either through YouTube or Patreon. There's also a free membership option on Patreon if you just want to lurk around. And you can also use one of the affiliate links below, or you can buy some of my merch, like this mug, for example, in immersion we find presence mug. Links are in the description below as well. All contributions to this channel are used to purchase the software and hardware I talk about on this channel. And with that being said, let's hop into Ableton and check out an Apple Spatial Binaural Rendering enabled Dolby Atmos workflow with Ableton Live. Now, the way I'm going to work with the Audio Movers plugin is once again in standalone version, and I'm going to use that in connection with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, which is a really nice solution if you already have a DAW that you don't want to leave in favor of Studio One, for example, and you just want to get your feet wet in Dolby Atmos. That's a nice solution because the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer comes in a free version, which is the Essentials version in a paid version, and we're going to use that in order to get a Dolby Atmos project going in Ableton Live. But the first thing that I need to do is I need to first start up the standalone version of the binaural renderer. This is this one here, the binaural renderer for Apple Music from Audio Movers. And couple of things that I need to do in the settings. In the settings, I need to set up the inputs and outputs. Once again, the output is going to be the AirPods. In my particular case, once again, the loopback device that kind of sends it into the AirPods as well is into the Rodecaster. In your case, those would be the AirPods directly. And then I need to choose the input device. And for input device, there is this binaural renderer link that comes with the Audio Movers plugin. You can technically use any audio device that can route 16 channels from one application into another application. There are quite a few of those. Pro Tools comes with one, and there are other solutions or other software solutions that also come with similar kind of devices. But this is the one that comes with the binaural renderer plugin from Audio Movers, so let's just use that one. So we're going to set that to the binaural renderer link. And that is really everything that we need to do here. Here we can also change the rendering mode from headphones music to speaker music to headphones movie. I'm going to leave that at headphones music. And this is really everything I need to do here. So let's just kind of click that away. And then we're going to open up Ableton, going to work with Ableton Live 12. And I'm going to do the same thing that I also did with Studio One. So I'm going to use this little loop here and I'm going to drop that in here. And just kind of in anticipation, let's just kind of turn the gain down a little. So let's add the Dolby Atmos Composer. So let's search for Dolby first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the VST3 version. I'm going to drop that onto my main track. And this once again is going to render the Dolby Atmos audio into something that I can listen to. A couple of settings that I need to change. First of all, I'm going to switch the speakers over to 7.1.4 because that is what the binaural rendering plugin expects. Then I'm going to turn the headphones off because I'm going to listen through or monitor everything through the binaural rendering plugin or the standalone version of that plugin. And then I'm going to change the external output to the binaural renderer link, and that makes sure that the audio is sent directly from the Dolby Atmos Composer into the binaural renderer from Audio Movers, bypassing the output of Ableton. So in order to make sure that I don't have anything going out of Ableton, what I'm also going to do maybe is I'm going to add a utility and just kind of take that utility here on the master track and just kind of set it to mute to make sure that nothing goes out of the regular output of Ableton, because I want to have the Dolby Atmos Composer be responsible for sending the audio from Ableton into the binaural renderer from Audio Movers. And then in order to make sure that I actually hear the track, I also need to route the track into the Dolby Atmos Composer, and this is done once again by using the Beam plugin. So let's search for Beam, and that is a plugin. And here we have the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin that comes with the Dolby Atmos Composer. And that Beam plugin will then essentially beam the audio into the Dolby Atmos Composer. Here I can kind of make a couple of settings. I can select whether or not I want to have that routed into the Atmos bed, which is sort of the default here. I'm going to switch that over to objects in order to make sure that the audio comes in as object. So let me just check on the Dolby Atmos Composer side here, and I see that I have this one track coming in as an object, and it's going to be routed into channels 11 and 12. And with that I should already hear something, so let's press play and see if we get audio. And yes, indeed we do. And if I now go into the binaural renderer, I essentially see here the different modes that I have. I can select the static binaural rendering mode. It took a little until I figured out what to do. And once again, I want to have that with head tracking enabled. So let's turn that over to head tracking. And if I now move the head, I should once again have the same impression that I had with Studio One. I have the audio on the right side. On the left side. And let's maybe do the same thing that we also did for Studio One. Let's go into the Beam plugin here. And let's turn it over to mono. Once again, if I move my head, and this works exceptionally well. So regardless of what digital audio workstation you're using, you can work with Dolby Atmos. You can do that for free by using the Dolby Atmos Composer, the free version. And you can monitor everything with head tracking enabled in a fully immersive 3D environment, provided, once again, that you are on a Mac, and an Apple Silicon Mac to be exact. So in conclusion, as I said many times before, Apple's spatial binaural rendering works extremely well and is an exceptionally convenient way to work with Dolby Atmos in a headphone-based production environment. There are a few minor Disadvantages though, first of all, you're required to use the AirPods Pro or AirPods Max, and those are not necessarily the best studio headphones. And then you need to get used to the dynamic recentering of the AirPods, but those are minor issues that I'm sure you will be able to work around. And this is really everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. And with that being said, see you all at the next video.